Okay, so this is the build guide for Artillery Ballista gemling. I'll run a quick T14 map, ball factory with a boss to showcase what the map, what the build looks like. And I'll talk through different item choices as well as passive.
Incoming!
So the playstyle is really relaxed. You just put down ballistas. It's a one-button build. You don't really have to think about playing a game or just mapping. So as you can see, here is pretty good. Really the only problem with this build is mana cost. You can really struggle with mana cost sometimes, especially if you're on a boss, you don't have any mana potions, and yeah, you can maybe summon like 2 permanent ballistas at a time, especially if you're in a 6 lane. There are ways to fix this, and you can put in inspiration and lower your damage and have much easier ballista time, but for me I just get fast gain fast charges per second, so I don't sort of get soft locked into a boss fight where I'm out of mana fast. But you can run inspiration, or you can run life tap, and spec into mana cost on the tree, you can do some annoyance, but I prefer blast cannon more damage, so here's the boss. Just do the boss quickly. This boss is level +2, as you can see, and this is a T14, so recently reduced.
No mana.
Okay, so here's the build guide. Right, so our main skill is Artillery Ballista. Basically how it works is you just put down a ballista next to you and it'll just target any enemy within the radius. It shoots up and down, so there is some sort of projectile time, so it doesn't attack them immediately. The projectiles can overlap, and they overlap based on the area of effect that you have. And so really, one of the things that we look to do is make sure that all the projectiles overlap by speccing a lot into AoE. Yeah, so that's our main skill, you know, we support it. So this skill, the thing to look out for is it converts a lot of the damage to fire damage. So the explosion itself gets converted 100% to fire, and the artillery gets converted to 60%. But most of our damage comes from the explosion, so that's why we're focusing on scaling rather than the artillery itself. Something else to note is that Artillery Ballista is a totem, and in POE 2, totems do not scale off your weapon. you can see that it says that totem uses its own weapon, dealing 262 to 393 base physical damage. That means that no matter how much base damage is on your weapon, it actually doesn't matter for the totem. And since we are a strictly totem build, we don't need to care about a lot of stats on the weapon. Basically, the main way to scale this damage on gear is through plus levels of projectile gems. So you can see here we have +6 to level of projectile gems, and this will increase the damage of Artillery Ballista. Secondly is increase elemental damage of attacks. So Artillery Ballista itself is an attack, and it does do elemental damage, so increase elemental damage of attacks is another way to scale the damage. You can get +2 gems on your weapon, on your amulet. So for example, you can have an amulet with +2 to level of projectile gems, as well as +3, right? We also get +2 from gemling. So that's the main way you would scale the damage on this weapon. But in this patch, they really heavily nerfed gem level scaling. So if you look at gem level scaling, it's really a lot worse than it used to be. So there are a couple other ways we try to scale the damage, which I'll go through in a bit. So in terms of the skill tree, some important things to note is that, yeah, we are a gemling tactician. In terms of ascendancy, I would go for quality. I would go for +2 levels. Then I get 30 less cost, and finally I get adaptive capability. Honestly, adaptive capability can be dropped. It really depends on how your attributes look like. In terms of like int gems, like hypothermia, it's kind of a pain to get enough int to be able to use the level 20 version. And you can see even now I don't have enough attributes to use level 20. So this node is really nice. If you don't want to use this node, you can also use gem studded, and the way you would use gem studded is you would have 2 artillery ballista setups. You can have one for clear and one for bossing, and you can change the gems supports as you need it to be for mapping. So in terms of the tree, this is what it looks like. I will have a POE in the description. A couple important things to note. So if we look at how Artillery Ballista works, I'll go find a monster real quick. Maybe just in Act 1, doesn't really matter where. Sure. So if I put down a ballista, there's a time for the ballista to arm, and it shoots up, and the projectile needs to arrive on the ground before it actually does damage, right? So there's a huge delay in terms of our damage, and one of the problems is really just this delay. It kind of feels bad, especially when there are mobs that are running at you. So there are a couple ways to solve this. You can have a ripwire ballista, and basically what this ballista would do is, first of all, it doesn't have a delay, it doesn't go up and down, it strictly just shoots straight forward. So it has a much faster casting time, and it pins them, so when it pins them, the enemies come, right? So that's a way to sort of mitigate this problem when you're mapping, if you would like to press 2 buttons. Personally, I prefer 1 button, but that's okay. The other problem is accuracy is a big issue. And so you can imagine your ballista shoots upwards, it takes maybe a second to hit the ground. If you miss that attack, it needs to attack again to hit your target. And so it makes it very inconsistent if your accuracy isn't 100%. And you can look at your accuracy by clicking here, and you can click on the artillery itself, and you can see the main chance to hit, right? And different ranges have different chances to hit. So normally people would solve this by stacking dexterity, and we are gemling, so this is something we could do. But personally, I think it's better for us to stack strength, to stack our life pool. So in terms of defenses, it's really difficult to get sufficient defenses through dodge, in my opinion. I prefer stacking life, so I want to stack strength. So in that case, I'm unable to really stack dexterity for accuracy. So one of the most important nodes that really makes the build feel a lot better is resolute technique, right? I would say this is basically mandatory. I mean, we're not really expecting to crit anyway, right? So we should just take resolute technique here. You won't miss anymore, and your clear will be much more consistent. You'll find that you really stop getting stormed as much. Before I took resolute technique, my accuracy was somewhere at like 90% for a chance to hit at 2 meters, and beyond 5 meters it was like 70%, and that's basically impossible because monsters have their own evasion rating, and so this does not consider monsters' evasion rating, right? So this is if the monster has no evasion rating at all. So Artillery Ballista is really important. Recommend taking it. And so yeah, we path down here, and this is just a general tree. I would say we start off, you would path towards this totem node, right? You can start using it when you have Ripwire Ballista. You can level with, I personally level with Explosive Grenade. I think there are a bunch of other ways. Really, any way you level is fine. You just need to get to the totems, and once you get totems, the campaign gets really super easy. So, we'll talk about how we scale the damage, right? So in this new patch, they introduced a couple new unique items which are really strong for scaling damage. First one is Heat Shiver. So gain 1% of cold damage as extra fire damage per 1% chill magnitude. And in POE 2, you can hit 50% chill magnitude, which means gain 50% of cold damage as extra fire damage. So that's a huge damage boost. We also use Yoke of Suffering. And Yoke of Suffering makes enemies take increased damage for each elemental ailment on them. And there are a total of 5 elemental ailments, but you can just ignore Electrocute. It's really hard to get working, right? So really there's only 4. So enemies would take up to 40% increased damage. And this mod is really strong because this is enemies taking increased damage. It's not increasing your damage. And what this means is this is a multiplier at the end of all your stats. So you can think of this as a 40% more damage multiplier, which is really huge. It's really hard to get. Yoke of Suffering itself also has really good stats. I mean, it gives life, it gives LE res, and it gives LE damage. I mean, it's just a great amulet. I got this for 3 div. I think right now it's about 6 or 7. But it's not mandatory. It's nice to have. The other thing is people would say, okay, why don't you get projectile skill gems on this amulet? And the main reason is because projectile skill levels would increase the mana cost of our Artillery Ballista, and that's already a huge problem. So you'd rather scale the damage in other ways if it's possible. Yeah. In terms of the chest piece, I'm using the Coming Calamity. I would recommend using a rare armor until you can get this. This is really like optional. It's a feel good unique. You don't need this. Rings are just rares with stats on them: life, movement speed, res, as well as added damage to attacks. So the other way we can scale ballista damage is getting adds damage to attacks. So if you take a look at my Artillery Ballista and you can see the main hand damage, you can see that when you remove this, right, so this 7214 and now it's 6615, and when you put it back in, you can see the damage goes up because added flat damage does apply to your ballistas because your ballista is using an attack. So that's one of the other ways, and it's really a good stat to look for on your weapons, on your rings. I really recommend just looking for these because these are global, whereas added damage like this is local on your weapon, so it doesn't do anything, right? So try to get as much added fizz damage, cold damage, fire damage. The only other prefix you care about is life, so just look for life and added damage prefixes. I have a couple other rings. I don't have them right now. It's alright. So in terms of scaling damage, right, besides projectiles, how do we scale damage and why do we use the uniques that we use? So I think a big question people ask me is, why are we using Painter's Servants? Right, so why do we not use Blueflame, which converts 100% of your elemental damage to cold? So the first thing is Painter's Servant gives you a gain as extra. That means basically we're getting, using these gloves, they're 29% extra elemental damage compared to using Blueflame, right? Besides that, you can corrupt this, and this can go up to 12%, 12%, 12%. So ideally you get 36%, but that would be like a mirror or something. The other thing it does is it lets us convert all our elemental damage to fire, cold, and lightning. And for ballistas here, even though it says that 100% of physical damage is converted to fire damage, this fire damage is further converted. So gem conversion happens before item conversion. So now you can see my fire, cold, and lightning all have the same damage, right? So why do we want, fire, cold, and lightning to be equal? So the first things first is there is a spirit gem that's called Trinity. It's currently bugged. It doesn't work with ballistas. It'll crash your game. But when GGG fixes this bug, it will be one of the strongest damage increases you can get for the build. So if you take a look at this spirit gem here, and we take a look at Trinity, right? So you get 8% more elemental damage with attacks per 50 resonance of any type. and this scales all the way up to, I believe, 20%. I'm not 100% sure. And you can see the additional effect from quality is more elemental damage of attacks. As gemling, we have about 20% quality from the tree, so really this would be plus 4%. So total would be somewhere like plus 20% per 50 resonance of any type. The downside is it requires you to have fire, cold, and lightning damage that are basically equal so that you can build up resonance. So when this is fixed, we'll swap to this, and we'll get basically 40-50% more elemental damage of attacks. And this is more elemental damage of attacks. This isn't increased. And this applies to ballistas. So this is huge. But you really need your elemental damages to be even. Secondly, we have Yoke of Suffering, which means that we need to inflict elemental ailments on enemies. We can inflict chill with blueflame bracers, which convert 100% of fire to cold, but we will not be able to inflict shock or ignite. Now, with these gloves, we can easily inflict shock and ignite. And ignite is kind of irrelevant, it's just really for the Yoke of Suffering, but we can talk about shock. Shock also makes enemies take increased damage, and it can go up to 50% shock, so enemies take 50% increased damage, which again is another huge way to scale our damage besides just going for gem levels. So the other thing is, you know, if shock increases the elemental damage that enemies take, right? We also have cold damage as extra fire per chill magnitude. So basically what this means is that with the combination of Painter Servants, Heat Shiver, as well as Yoke of Suffering, we can scale ailment magnitude to increase the damage our enemies take. So some of the best nodes to take are nodes like Lasting Trauma. So there's a 5% reduced attack speed on this, but the 30% increased magnitude is massive. So the way ailments in POE 2 work is if you don't have any magnitude of damaging ailments, for example, the maximum chill that you can inflict is probably 20%. And same for shock. But when you get increased magnitude of ailments you inflict, it increases the cap all the way up to 50%. So our goal is to hit 50% shock and 50% chill on the enemy for 50% increased damage taken from shock, as well as 50% cold as extra fire damage from Heat Shiver. So there's also another node here which increases the magnitude of damaging ailments. This is a huge boost. You can also take these nodes. And I have anointed Unbound Forces, which also increases ailment magnitude, specifically for chill and shock. Part of the reason why I anoint this is because it's cheap. There are some alternative anoints that you can get, which are this. Breaking Point would be probably the best one. It's 30%, right? You can also, basically any magnitude of ailment, you can, so here's another one. Here's another one. Yeah. Let me just saw this real quick. Yep, so that's why we use Painter Servants instead of Blueflame, because without Painter Servants there would be no way we could possibly shock as well as ignite. So endgame, you're really looking for a corrupt that will give you 12% of all three, right? But that's endgame. So next unique item that we use is the Coming Calamity. So why do we use this? So if you look at our tree, we are really far from any sort of elemental penetration, and in POE 2, elemental penetration is a lot stronger in the sense that you can get a lot of it from the tree. So you can see here we have damage pen for lightning, we have fire pen, and there's some cold pen somewhere too, but the problem is that our damage is evenly split between 3 types, right? So it doesn't really make sense for us to invest in specific ailment penetration. There is this node here which gives us 15% Ellie pen, but it's too expensive to path to. I really don't think there's any way to make pathing to this worth it. So unfortunately we can't take this node. And penetration is a huge portion of damage in POE 2 because it's a lot more easy to get. It just doesn't penetrate below 0%. So the way I've solved this is by getting the Coming Calamity. So first of all, this chest piece has great stats. I mean, it gives 80 max life and potentially 120% res. But the most important part is enemies in your presence have no LE res. Right? So this means that we don't have to invest at all into any elemental penetration. Just standing next to enemies will make them have 0% res, and it allows us to penetrate all 3 elements that we have here. So this is huge. Additionally, it gives you Herald of Ash, Ice, and Thunder, which are free. There is no spirit cost to these. So if you see here, I have Herald of Ash, Ice, and Thunder. And if I remove Overwhelming Presence and Wind Dancer, you can see I'm at 100 spirit. So these are basically free. And the good thing about them is that they help with your clear. So specifically Herald of Ice. I mean, for example, if I go into just, you know, like any map with a lot of enemies, you'll see that when my totems freeze and kill an enemy, they explode, right? And we're investing into ailment magnitude, so freezing is not a problem. So look here, you can see they explode, right? And so this is huge for clear. Like sometimes they don't freeze, but
Slow him down.
sorry, yeah. You can see the Herald of Ice works and they explode. So this does work on your ballistas, but really I think this is just nice to have. It really isn't that important. The main thing that we're using it for is no elemental rest. Something else to note is that these heralds, Ice and Thunder, actually scale off of your weapon damage. So you really, if you want to scale them really well, you need like a really endgame weapon with like T1 flat, T1 flat, T1 LE, as well as +7, which is going to be like a mirror or something. But it's something to work towards. Nice to have. Yeah. So those are the unique weapons, unique items that I use. In terms of the sockets, I highly recommend Area of Effect. As mentioned previously, if we look at our ballistas, they fire up into the air, and there's three areas where they'll shoot. And we really want these areas to overlap, because when they overlap, they can shotgun. I did some testing. You see, so there's overlapping. So I did some testing. I believe at 100% area of effect, just generic area of effect increase, you can get about on average 2.5 overlaps. I'm not 100% sure, but basically area of effect is basically a damage stat for us. It's also a clear stat. It increases your clear significantly, and there are these new berry talismans that can go on your helmet. So we recommend using berry talismans in your helmet. In terms of your boots, yeah, I would also recommend using the Ox Talisman. So this increases your presence. So if you take a look at this, this is the AoE where enemies have no LE res. So if I take these boots off, you can see this AoE goes down a decent bit. So best case, you could corrupt this, you can get 2 slots and you get 40% increased presence area of effect. In terms of your chest piece, yeah, we'll also recommend quality of all skills. As mentioned previously, when we do use Trinity, you can see that the quality here increases more elemental damage of attacks, right? And this is more. From Gemling, we get 16%, so we get 10, 12, 14, 16, right? So the next breakpoint is 20, so we would need 2 sockets with 2% each in order to hit 20 on our Trinity. So this is basically mandatory. The other good thing is quality also decreases the attack time. Right, and attack time is sort of basically like attack speed, so it's also a good stat to have for ballistas. Other than that, I mean, there's nothing else that really cares about quality. There is, you know, your curse, there's overwhelming presence, but the heralds do not really care about quality. Before you get, so I would say the mandatory uniques is just Painter's Servant. You really want to use this. If you can't get this, you can use Blueflame. I think they're all about like 3x each, right? And just plus levels on your weapon. You don't really need anything else. In terms of the sockets, right, I also recommend using elemental damage of attacks in your sockets. I think these are 2x each. If you don't have Coming Calamity and you don't have a source of elemental penetration and you don't want to curse, you can also use the core that gives you elemental penetration with attacks here, and that would be an easy way to get some base elemental penetration. So in terms of the support gems, so here are the Artillery Ballista support gems. So first, we get Primal Armament. This is for sure, we take it. I mean, this is just 25% unconditional weapon damage. Secondly, we'll take Overabundance, because Overabundance lets us place up to 4 totems. So we go from 3 totems to 4 totems, which is a 33% increase in our damage. Now there's a 50% less skill effect duration, but totems by default have a 16-second duration. So it goes down to 8 seconds, which I think is more than okay. Right, you can take this off if you want. It's really up to you. We also take Martial Temple. This is another unconditional 20% attack speed, which is nice. Next, for the last two supports. So the last two supports are actually quite flexible, and it really depends on what you're trying to do. So as you can see, right, my ballistas have some time before the projectiles actually hit the ground. So one way to make it feel better when you're mapping is to use acceleration. And if you use acceleration, the projectiles will go up and hit the ground faster. I don't know if you can tell, but it's definitely noticeable when you play the build. For me personally, I prefer more damage because I'm doing bosses. So I take Deliberation. Deliberation is a new support gem, and it basically also gives you 20% more damage unconditionally. It gives you a movement speed penalty while you use skills, but when you play ballistas, you're just setting them down and you're moving. So this movement speed penalty is really inconsequential. You really don't feel it, right? So this is 20% more damage. And lastly, for the last support gem, you can take Fire Mastery. This increases the level of it by 1, which gives you a bit more damage. You could also put Magnified Effect, which I have somewhere else. You can put Magnified Effect in, and what this does is basically make your clear better. It gives you more overlaps as well, right? It makes your clear better, so it feels good if you want to use it. But again, I'm mostly focusing on damage. My clear is fine enough as is, so I'm switching to Fire Mastery, which gives me +1 level. In terms of the other gems that you have Frost Bomb. I'm actually not 100% sure if Exposure works with Coming Calamity. For example, if they have no elemental resistance, can you reduce it lower? Because in POE 1, I believe this was not the case, right? Like if they have no elemental resistance, it just means they're at 0. So it doesn't matter if you apply Exposure or if you apply Curse. Thinking about it, it probably doesn't matter. I basically never really click these buttons. You can see my skill bar. This doesn't have them, and you can just drop them. So it's literally a one button build. Overwhelming Presence is another good reason to get Presence AoE on your boots. It makes it so that the enemies have reduced ailment threshold, which means that it's easier to apply elemental ailment to them. So if you see me fighting the boss just now, I got up to, I believe, 32% shock, and my chill is about at 20-something%. So a big part of that is the Overwhelming Presence, and you can quality this up. I haven't qualityed it yet, but if you quality it up, you can get up to 10% reduced, so the total will be something like 33% reduced, which makes it a lot easier to land ailments. And you know, this requires them to be in your presence, but we're using Coming Calamity anyway, so we should be standing in their presence regardless. And there is actually a visual effect for Overwhelming Presence. There is no visual effect for Coming Calamity, so if you have the visual effect for Overwhelming Presence, you'll know when something is affected by this debuff. For the other spirit gem we use Wind Dancer. Honestly, I would say Wind Dancer is not really needed. I've been actually experimenting with a couple other options. I think the better option is to get a companion, but companions do require a lot of farming and resetting for them. So in terms of companions, so I have this companion and I believe this one. The companions are newly introduced. They are basically like Pokemon. You can catch them. So basically you catch a rare monster and it retains its modifiers. So you can see here this Haste Aura, increased AoE. So if we put this in, you can see it gets summoned and we get Haste. So Haste is actually really nice because move speed is a very rare stat in POE 2. And it also lets us attack faster, which increases our damage. And it also affects our ballistas too, right? This one is a ranged one, so if you get Haste Aura, really recommend getting a ranged minion, because otherwise the minion would just charge at enemies and it's gonna die, right? And it's a pain. Other than that, some other options are this one. So this is the one that I got. So sometimes you'll find a beast with a temporal bubble that's very large. I don't know what skills this temporal bubble. It's not a monster stat. I think it might be just randomly determined. But you can see this temporal bubble is huge. It's basically the entire screen. If I put in Magnified Effect, it's the entire screen. And this just means that all the enemies in this AoE are slowed. And this one is range 2, which is nice. So it doesn't die a lot. It stays with me. Other options would be this one. So you can get basically any aura. You can get a Ellie Res aura, which I have not gotten. You can also get something like an Energy Shield aura. So if you see my Energy Shield's 9, it becomes 279, right? So, you know, for a little bit of extra survivability, you can get this, you know. But I think the best one really is this Lion Charger. I mean, not specifically the beast type, but what it does, and it gives you periodic invulnerability. And actually on this on this beast itself, what you can do is you can give it support gems like persistence. So if I just go to all gems, you can give it to persistence as well as ingenuity, which reduces the cooldown. Sorry, it's not ingenuity, it's there's this support gem for CDR, I believe. I don't remember the name, but what it means is that this invulnerability aura is almost permanently up. Like, it's actually ridiculous how often it is up. If I go into a group of mobs, I would say it has 50% uptime without any support gems, and with persistence as well as CDR, I think it's something like 70-80%. Only thing is this beast does charge away from you, and you need to be next to it. So here we'll see. So you can see I'm invulnerable. I can't take damage, right? And this beast does cast it quite often. Okay, it's gonna die, but really I would say it does cast it about once every 10 seconds. So you have 50% uptime. On bosses, it's really huge. A lot of boss damage is sort of like in bursts. But yeah, this beast just charges. To farm it, you can look up guides. There are ways to farm it to find the specific mods that you want. You can just play the game. Yeah, so those are the things. So another trick that we have is we have Ripwire Ballista. So previously I mentioned that Ripwire Ballista pins enemies so they don't move, which is nice, right? So you can see this monster is pinned, it can't move. So there are a few tricks to this. First of all, we can use this support called Great Wood, which basically makes it so you can only summon one totem, but the totem does a lot more damage. So you can see one active totem, but you know, they get more damage per limit, whatever. The trick is that even though you have Great Wood on the Ripwire, you can still summon 3 other totems on your artillery. So this is still 4 totems in total. If you really want to, you know, like min-max it and you're against a boss, you can take Overabundance out and you put it in Ripwire. So now you can have 3 Artillery Ballistas as well as 1 Great Wood, right? So instead of Overabundance here, you would put another damage support, or you could put Acceleration, you could put Magnified Effect, you know, whatever you want here. But it's really min-maxy, it requires you changing your gems a lot, so I prefer not to do that. I put Heft in here. I mean, really any support gem that increases damage, because pin is based off the damage it does. You could also just not run this at all. Like, it's really just like when there's a rare mob that's really quick, it's chasing you, it's nice to pin it down. And it does pin bosses too, but it does take some time to build up the pin. Yeah. So I think overall that is the build. The biggest problem with this build by far is mana cost, and so we solve it by taking less mana cost of skills. Even then, as you get to higher projectile levels, it becomes a big problem. So a couple of ways you can fix this. If you would like to reduce some of the mana cost in return for losing some damage, is pathing down here. So here you get reduced mana cost of attacks, and it also converts mana cost to life cost. So you can use life regen to offset it. There's some more mana cost reduction, I believe here, 6% mana cost. It also has skill speed, which is alright. Yeah, basically these clusters here are alright. Something else you can do is you can come to here and you can anoint mental toughness. It's quite expensive. I believe Fear is a divine, so not worth it for me right now either. Yeah, so remember, Resolute Technique is a must to take. So I recommend pathing down here, getting these nodes. When you're leveling, you get this node, you get these nodes when you swap to Ballistas, and then you just go for Resolute Technique as soon as possible. It makes the build feel a lot better. Other than that, really what we're pathing for is just generic damage. So these nodes are kind of nice. Increased damage with hits against shocked, chilled, and ignited enemies, as well as generic elemental damage. So these ones are nice to get if you have the points. They're basically just free damage as long as you're using Painter's Servants. We get a lot of AoE, so there's an AoE cluster. We can get this as well, because AoE is one of the ways that we can scale unconditional generic damage for ballistas. So we have AoE here, we have AoE here, and something else to note is that the reason why we scale AoE so much is because Herald of Ice is also attack, right? And so it scales with the AoE that we scale as well. This applies to Herald of Thunder as well. I believe Herald Thunder is bugged with the chest piece, so it actually doesn't do anything right now, but when I don't use the chest piece and use Herald of Thunder on its own, it actually does work. So this is a bug that needs to be, that will be fixed eventually. We get generic attack speed as well. Attack speed is very nice. The faster the attack speed, the faster the bolts come out, and the faster the bolts come onto the ground, so they do more damage. Generic AoE. So we do take this elemental resistance. So once you start getting into T15 maps, survivability does become an issue for totems. So this note is really important, and this is actually part of why I prefer Mercenary over Huntress or Deadeye, you know, because you're just much closer to the starting area, so you don't have to waste a lot of points to pop over here, right? And in the future, I'm going to take Fizz damage reduction, LE res, as well as the life, so then I will path to this node through here, so I can drop these pathing nodes, which basically works out to be the same, but I currently do need the strength. Yeah. In terms of defenses, I'm actually not too sure how I'm going to solve defenses. I mean, first of all, this is a totem build, so if you go slower, you really never need to be in danger, but I kind of like to map quite quick because, yeah. So one of the ways I'm thinking about fixing it is really stacking strength to stack life. From my math, if all my gear has strength on it, so for example, my rings don't have strength on it, my rings don't have life on it, not too much life, they need strength as well as your weapon and your boots, they all can get strength. If you stack strength enough, you can get to about 4,000 life, which I believe is quite respectable for POE 2 standards. And so that's basically how I'm going to plan on solving defenses on this build. You can lean into evasion with Wind Dancer, but I'm not too sure how that will work out. Yeah. So that is the build. If you have any questions, you can just leave a comment on the YouTube video. I'll add a POB at the end. You can just PM me in game as well if you have any questions. In terms of crafting the crossbow, like I know a lot of people have been saying that +6 and increased LE damage is really expensive. One of the ways you can do it is you can get a fracturing orb. So you can see here I have this weapon with T1 elemental damage of attacks. So you can buy one of these and it'll be eye level 81 because this mod requires eye level 81, and just fracture it. I think this weapon took was 1x, and I basically fractured on the first try, so fracturing orbs like 4x each, so 5x total. And what you want to do is you just want to spam chaos orbs on it. I did the math. I believe it's about 1 in 100 chaos orbs to hit projectile, about 100 to hit +7 to level of projectile skills. And so 100 chaos orbs was about a divine and a half last night, so the total cost would be about 2 divines for 139% increased LE damage and +7. And if you go on trade and you look for them, there are probably like 20 divines there, but the downside is, you know, you have to be lucky, but I'm sure I'll hit it eventually. Yeah. Okay, that's it.